Hey, it's Landon with Trigger Industries. We get a lot of questions as to the best way to install our Long John mud flaps. So we're going to show you how we do it using this 5th gen Dodge half ton. Each truck's a little bit different, but this method will work across the board. Before we drill any holes in the mud flaps, we always check the front fender for clearance. Turn the wheel all the way left and all the way right. Different suspension geometries can cause a slight difference in your wheel offsets, so it's worth checking both directions. Our front flaps have a custom geometry to help avoid as much rubbing as possible, but be sure to check it on your specific setup. So you want to make sure you're parked on smooth, flat ground, and then we'll set the wheels dead straight. We always go off the tires themselves and not the steering wheel. So this is everything that comes with the mud flaps. We give you the fasteners. For the Long Johns, we supply enough for 8 per corner. We generally only use 6, depending on the vehicle and how rigid the flap is. We give you the install tool, which we'll show you how to use. As far as supplies needed, we use an impact and a drill. We've got a driver, 5/16 for the fasteners that we supply. This little right angle tool is super handy. It allows you to keep the tires on the truck, which is the tires are your reference point, so that is a huge help. A scribe and a Sharpie to mark the holes, and a couple drill bits. So we just use a small 1/8" drill bit for a pilot hole. 5/16 is our final diameter hole for the fasteners, and then we use a larger bit just to deburr the drilled hole. We also use a bottle jack and a roll of tape, which we'll explain how in the next section. The mud flaps ship flat. You're going to want to give a bit of a gentle roll to them. It just helps in fitting them in the fender well. The coating will definitely be fine. You just want to make sure you don't put any hard creases in the flap. Something like that should be fine. So our method has us putting the fasteners in the fender before we drill anything in the mud flap. This allows us to precisely place the fasteners. We can get an even spread on them from top to bottom. And if there's a thin part of the fender lip that's hard to hit, it's much easier done when there's no flap in the way. We just need to determine how far up the fender the flap is going to come. So grab a piece of masking tape and we'll grab our flap. And the only thing to be cautious of here is that the kickback is up tight to the bottom of the truck. When you install them, we shoot for roughly 3/16 of gap here. But for the purpose of finding the end length of the flap, you can just make it touch the truck and that'll be good enough. So the tape goes at the end of the flap. And we generally bring it back about 1/2 inch just to err on the kind of the side of caution. And so between this point and the bottom of the fender is where you're going to evenly distribute your fasteners. These Dodges are great because they've got a handful of fasteners that are nice and evenly spaced. We're only going to need to add 1 at the top. So if your truck doesn't have any holes in it, then you can evenly mark out between 6 and 8. We generally do 6 fasteners, and you can actually go ahead and drill those into the truck. Don't put the washer in yet, just the screw head. And another thing, we leave this end one. We don't drill it until the flap is in place. And the reason for that is because the taper on the mounting plate, if you mount the flap without a ton of offset, then this fastener may not actually hit the mud flap. It may need to be moved down or in a bit. So you can go ahead and drill all of them except for the top one, install the fasteners, and then we'll mock up the mud flap. All the hardware is in the fender, whether it was the factory hardware that we left in or if we had to drill new holes and use the supplied hardware. The next goal is to position the flap, get it exactly where we want it in reference to the tire, the offset, and the height. And once that's set, we'll transfer the hardware location to the mud flap and drill the mud flap on the bench. So it's great to position the mud flap so that you can step back and eyeball it, make sure it's good and straight. To do that, we use a floor jack under the rubber to set the height. A roll of tape works awesome to put some pressure on the flap into the fender, and then a bottle jack on the long johns just to take up this portion. Now you want the flap to be touching all the fastener heads so that when you scribe them, they're actually in the correct locations. If there's a little bit of a gap, that's probably okay, but definitely make sure that you're getting it as tight to the fender as possible. So now I'm able to step back, align the mud flap to a line on the tire. If you're going to the edge of the sidewall, then you can eyeball it to that. If you want to go to a tread line, then you can set it up to there. But it really just lets you stand back and tweak the mud flap until it's in the perfect position. So we'll go ahead and straighten this one. So it's your preference as to how far out you want the mud flap mounted. Generally, you'll either go to the sidewall or pick a line on the tread and go flush to that. This one's been squared up to a location on the tire that the customer wants. So our next step is to scribe the screw head onto the mud flap. And long johns are done in 2 steps during this part. You want to scribe the bottom 50% of the hardware. We're not going to worry if the top appears to bow out a little bit. That will be fixed after we get the first half of the flap installed. So using the install tool, one side has a V to locate in the screw head, and the other side has a full circle to scribe a mark. If there's not a ton of clearance between the mud flap and the tire, a nice right angle pick works good to get in there and scribe it. If there is a lot of room, then a Sharpie's probably a bit easier. So just hold the install tool, make sure it's fully seated on that screw head. You really don't want to slip off it or have be caught on something to give you a false reading. Then your drilled hole is going to be in the wrong spot. And note that our height was set. You want to ensure that this is even all the way around. It's pretty easy to forget about it and have this end up being 3/4 of an inch or an inch lower than you want it to be. We've got our 4 scribed holes. We'll go ahead and drill them. We were using an 1/8 inch pilot hole, a 5/16 final diameter, and then a bigger bit just to deburr after drilling through stainless. It's nice to take the sharp burrs off. We've got our 4 holes in the flap drilled. We'll remove the 4 correlating fasteners. We'll install the flap using these 4. And then we'll have a bit of play because our drilled hole is a little bit larger than our fasteners. So we'll re-straighten that flap, tighten these 4, and then we will kind of finish the end of the flap. Once we get that where we want it, we'll scribe these final 2 holes, and then we'll drill our last one. We rehung the flap with those 4 holes we just drilled. We leveled it to the tire, got it nice and square, tightened those up. Now we need to work on getting this part to flow how we want it. We'll scribe our final few fasteners, and then we'll drill the last hole. So we put the bottle jack back in. We'll put a little bit of tension on it so that this stays where we want it. Then we'll stand behind the flap, eyeball this, make sure it doesn't bulge out at all. There's quite a bit of manipulation as far as pushing this in or out. And then you can set that bottle jack. And once you're happy with that, use that same install tool, scribe our final fasteners, and then this time we'll take a Sharpie for the last hole and make a mark right where you want it. And when we remove the flap to drill those scribed holes, we'll drill that Sharpie mark as well. And then upon final install, we'll just run that fastener into the fender using the self-tapping screw. So we'll go ahead and remove all these and start drilling. So we got all the holes drilled, rehung the flap, aligned it to the tire for the final time, went and torqued down all the fasteners, made sure they were snug. Now we'll do this same method for the remaining 3 corners.